FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Today's show is brought to you by Blue Sky Uranium Corporation. Blue Sky has first mover advantage in Argentina in the world's newest uranium and vanadium district. With an existing near-surface deposit that's open for expansion, Blue Sky also controls a massive district-scale land package with mineralization along a 145-kilometer-long trend. Blue Sky possesses tremendous exploration upside and is an excellent leverage play on rising uranium and vanadium prices. The company is run by a best-in-class management and technical team with proven exploration and development success in Argentina. Blue Sky Uranium trades under the ticker symbol BSK on the Toronto Venture Exchange and as BKUCF on the OTC. For more information and to stay on top of the latest news, go to blueskyuranium.com. That's blueskyuranium.com.
The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Welcome. You are listening to the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz. Today is May 6th, 2019. Well, it used to be that weekends were slow news days, but all of that in the age of Trump has changed because Trump doesn't really have any particular work hours. If he's up, he's working. Some of you might allege raising havoc or wreaking havoc, and that is true as well. Hey, as always, be a part of the show and email us at kl@kerrylutz.com. Well, while you were sleeping, while the world was sleeping or the country was sleeping, Trump was busy at work. And here's John Rubino and our Monday morning get-together. So, John, hey, you woke up and it was a different world once again.
Hey, Kerry. Yeah, Trump dropped a bomb last night. He raised tariffs on China on a Sunday night. And remember, this is when the headlines, actually for earlier that day, were that we were about a week away from finalizing the trade deal with China. So there were these really optimistic China leaks, I guess, coming from the administration prior to this. And then on Sunday night, boom,
dropped the bomb.
Yeah. And Trump had been saying for a while that the U.S. stock market going back up gave him an extra weapon in trade negotiations because he could take a hit to U.S. stocks from those, all-time highs in order to push China around in these trade negotiations. Because China, in his mind, needed high stock prices more than we did. And so what we saw this time was that our stock markets dropped a bit, 1 or 2%. China's went down by 5%. So presumably, this is putting more pressure on China to settle than on Trump. And, I really don't have an opinion about this. I have no idea, what everybody's thinking and who's under what kind of pressure, because everybody seems to be under a lot of pressure. China obviously needs to get back to some semblance of business as usual in global trade because their economy is suffering from the fact that their exports are down. And Trump, meanwhile, is heading into a really contentious election where he wants to be elected again, or at least he's acting like he wants to be elected again. There's, a lot of the opinion that has come out lately is that Trump didn't even want to be elected the first time. He was surprised and dismayed to find out that he won because he was really just trying to improve his brand and then make a lot more money in TV and real estate. But he is apparently running again and apparently wants to win. And this trade war with China is bad for that. If he can settle the trade war, get back to business as usual in terms of all our big multinationals that want to sell on the international markets, that's good for his reelection prospects. So he has the time pressure of an election coming up. So I think both of these entities, are incented to settle, and I think they will settle. This is just negotiating that's going on now. So I don't think the drop in U.S. stocks really matters fundamentally, and I don't think the big drop in Chinese stocks matters fundamentally, because this is just the knee-jerk reaction to some really contentious, unusual trade negotiations that are going on right now. I think probably what we have to look forward to is them settling the trade war and a big spike in equity prices when that happens, and then gradually the reassertion of fundamentals, which are not good for equities pretty much anywhere in the world. The stock prices are at levels that in the past led to big crises and crashes. So we're there again. So I think that it's highly likely that the high in equity prices in this cycle will be seen the day after they announce a settling of the trade war.
Yeah, my guess is there's one last thing he wants out of these negotiations, the one last sticking point. So he's just posturing and basically jawboning, whipsawing them, walk away from the table, right? That's always his thing. You got to be ready to walk away from the table to get what you want. And I think it probably also has something to do with North Korea in there as well. Although it's I guess the 100-pound gorilla in the room, North Korea. But it wouldn't surprise me. He wants them to do something on North Korea, stop this stuff. And they're saying, well, we don't have anything to do with it. And he said, fine, goodbye. And we'll work it out elsewhere. Yeah, that's my guess.
Well, there are a lot of legitimate things for Trump to ask for from China, because China cheats in a lot of ways. And, it made sense to allow them to cheat early on when we really wanted them to become a good international citizen. In other words, to become a big, mostly capitalist country that has a stake in stability going forward. Now they are that, and they're still stealing intellectual property and bullying companies that want to operate within their borders, and putting up barriers to a lot of international competition. And they're doing things that we aren't allowed to do, and most other countries couldn't get away with doing, because they're 1/4 of the world's population, and everybody wants to be part of their economic miracle. And it's past the point where they should be allowed to do that, because now it's bullying. Before it was an up-and-coming country trying to become part of the global economy. Now it's the second or first biggest economy in the world, pushing everybody else around and blatantly cheating. So it's reasonable to ask for what Trump is asking for. And the only question is the price too high if it causes turmoil in the global financial markets? And the answer so far is no. It's not. It's not causing much turmoil at all, because everybody's stock prices are up. And around the world, stock markets are up, which is to today's policymakers, that's the number that matters. In other words, if equity prices are up, they think they're doing a good job, and don't realize that they're just generating inflation by creating too much currency, and that inflation happens to be manifesting in financial asset prices. But it's still a bad thing, because it still distorts the fundamentals of the global financial system. We don't get that yet, because in Keynesian economics, that's not an issue. Debt and the price of financial assets, that doesn't really figure into their models, so they don't really care about them. They will someday. Yes. But in the meantime, all of this stuff is entertaining, but not really meaningful in any way to anybody who lives in the real world.
Yeah. So in other words, don't get taken in. See what's really happening here. And what's really happening is not what the media reports ever, right?
Well, the corporate media in the U.S. is coming in for some, very justified criticism now, at least in our little part of the internet, because they're basically owned by multinational companies who tend to make money from things we don't necessarily think are good. In other words, if we have another war in the Middle East, MSNBC apparently approves of that, because their corporate owners will make a lot of money from it. And same thing with Fox News, and same thing with CNN. They're all conflicted because the guys who call the real shots on their networks have ulterior motives for slanting a lot of stories in the way that they do. And that's a big part of why the mainstream media is largely in favor of us apparently invading Venezuela, which would make no sense in a rational world, right? Why would we care what happens in Venezuela? And they're in favor of us virtually going to war with Russia.
Yeah.
Which is just the craziest idea in the world. We're the two nuclear powers of the world. Are we going to actually fight? Are we going to have a shooting war with Russia? That is so crazy. It's so terrifying. And yet these guys seem to want it to happen. It's hard to understand, except for the fact that, if we use up a lot of cruise missiles on Russia, we have to replace them. And General Dynamics or whoever makes a profit from it. So, it's a terrifying way to look at the world, but it seems to be accurate that the U.S. media has been hijacked by the military-industrial complex. And that's why we're hearing stories slanted the way that they are now.
Yeah, slanted they are. So when you're looking at the day's headlines, John, how do you interpret things? How do you read between the lines?
Well, to me, it's all about debt. All of this stuff all the noise that we're hearing is really irrelevant in light of the fact that we're taking on more and more debt year after year after year. It's inherently a self-destructive activity to borrow way more money than you can ever hope to pay off. And if the whole world is doing it, that kind of determines the future from my point of view, or at least the course of the future in the financial world and the political world. Because, you screw up your finances, you screw up your politics. That's just how that works. And so the craziness that we're seeing out there makes complete sense in light of the fact that we're borrowing way too much money. And, you almost never see this big stories framed that way in the mainstream media. It's all, this senator said that and this congressman disagreed by saying that. And then, there's no sense that, well, the senator and the congressman are deranged because they're running out of money with which to buy votes going into the next election. And, their constituents are mad at them because there aren't any of these good jobs. That kind of thing can be all traced back to the fact that we're rapidly going broke, and nobody seems to be paying attention to that. And so that's what makes mainstream media coverage of most big stories so frustrating. From my point of view, it's like they're ignoring the thing that's causing all of this. Mm-hmm. And so and I'm in a tiny minority, I think, of people who look at the world that way, but it seems to be the right way to look at today's world. And you trace our troubles back to either 1971, when Richard Nixon took the world off the gold standard and basically handed a unlimited credit card to every major country, or to the 1980s, when Ronald Reagan ran huge deficits and found out there were basically no political consequences.
No ramifications.
Yeah. So the governments in those 2 decades gave themselves the tools to create unlimited amounts of currency and the political rationale for running up insane debts. In other words, there was no consequence for it, and they have the tool to do it. So let's do it. And that's what we've seen since then. Mm-hmm. So, and we're not addressing it or anything. We're actually ramping it up from here. Now you got Republicans and Democrats coming up with schemes to guarantee $1 trillion deficits for the U.S. government. As far as the eye can see. So, it almost doesn't matter which of them are in charge now as far as finances goes. And it means we're heading for that cliff at an accelerating rate. We don't know exactly where the cliff is. What number we'll look back on and say, oh yeah, when total debt hit, 400% of GDP or whatever, that's when we really should have worried. We don't know what that number is, but we know we're headed that way at an accelerating rate because we know it's out there. And the numbers are getting bigger now on an upward sloping arc. So I know I've been saying this for a long time, but it is demonstrably true. That wall, the cliff is out there and we're heading for it.
Mm-hmm. And it's just a question of when we're going to hit it, right?
Yeah. You would think, unless something else happens in the meantime, some gigantic war or something like that would derail everything. But
in
the meantime, if we go on as we're going now, where the world is not really at war on any vast scale, and we're just borrowing huge amounts of money at every level of every major society. At some point, those debts become unmanageable, and we hit the Austrian economics crack-up boom, or we have a 1930s style depression, or et cetera, et cetera. Name the big economic calamity, and one of those is coming. Kondrachev winter. One of those things is coming. We don't know what. We don't know exactly what the details will be as we head into it, but we're definitely heading that way.
Yeah, so it would appear. And we would be remiss if we didn't talk about what's happening right now with Israel, Persian Gulf, Iran. We're sending another carrier group out there just for the fun of it, because they probably didn't have anything better to do anyway, right?
Yeah. Well, 20 people died in the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians yesterday, apparently, according to the headlines. And we've got the U.S. and Russia contending in the Middle East, backing different sides in different conflicts. And Iran is a big player. They want to be the regional power. And they're asserting themselves. So we've got a mess over there. And I think it's safe to say that nobody in the U.S. leadership has the slightest understanding of what the issues are over there. They just want to go in and stomp around and kill a bunch of people and assert themselves. And that's been our history for the past, let's say, 40 years, if not the last 100 years in the Middle East, where we have no idea what we're doing, but we go do something. Just
got to do something.
We ought to be involved in some way, and
have to do something. You can't just sit back and let the place blow up, right?
Because, the oil's there. Yep. And we perceive that as in our national interest to maintain a steady flow of oil. But is it really, in a world of solar and wind and electric cars and the U.S. being a fairly big oil producer now, do we really need the Middle East? Because we wouldn't care about it if oil wasn't crucial to us. We probably would not really pay much attention. Already, ask the average American to pick out Iran and Iraq on a map. They would have no idea how to do it. They would probably be somewhere in Asia, pointing to things. But if there was no oil over there, we wouldn't even know the names of those countries. We would have so little interest in that place that it would never show up in the news, and nobody would ever be taught about it in school or anything. And we'll go back to that someday. When the oil runs out, we'll stop caring about Iran, and that would be a really good thing for them, because we have not made their lives better by intervening in their elections and getting their leaders killed by the CIA and stuff like that. So if we had just left the Middle East alone, it would be a much more peaceful place, I think, now than it is. And
agreed.
If we abandoned it, it would probably go back to be, it would have a lot of turmoil in the short run, but it would go back to being, a place where they've worked out their own issues without outside interference. So, but that's not to be. And it's the same thing with Latin America. We're not going to leave those guys alone. We're not going to leave the Middle East alone. And we're going to spend trillions of dollars and tens of thousands of American lives stomping around in these places without any understanding of why we're doing it or any sense that we're actually going to gain anything from it. Very frustrating, and I've said this a few times on your show, where I've got draft age sons. so our foreign policy is especially terrifying to me, because we could get wrapped up in something that metastasizes, that turns out to be a way bigger deal than we thought it was going to be. And then we start drafting people, we grab my kids and send them over to some hellhole on the other side of the world. I hate that idea. And, wouldn't let it happen. I'll ship them somewhere where nobody can find them before I let them be sent over to be target practiced in some war that doesn't make any sense. Yeah. Anyhow, that probably enraged a lot of people, but that's the...
But I feel the same way. If you have kids, you look at it a totally different way, don't you?
Well, yeah, it becomes personal at that point. It's easy to hear about a convoy being blown up or something like that in some other part of the world, and not really feel an emotional reaction to it. But if it's your kid being sent over to some place where convoys are being blown up, that's a whole different thing. And the guys in charge who are doing the sending, their kids aren't going over there. And they themselves obviously are not having to go over there. So it's really easy for them to move the pieces around on the chessboard. And and not feel any personal sense of dread about what's going to happen, which is why they ought to be really careful. They ought to recognize that it's real people that they're dealing with, and only commit U.S. forces anywhere in the world to something where our national interest is absolutely at stake in a really clear and present way. And that's not what we've done for the past generation, at least. We've developed the sense that our soldiers are kind of interchangeable pieces that don't really matter on a personal level. So we send them off to be killed and misused in other ways without really giving much thought to it. And again, historians are going to have a field day with so much of what goes on right now. And this is going to be one of them, where we were so clueless and so careless about the use of the most powerful military force in the world that we're ruining it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a bit disconcerting, isn't it? But hey, ignorance got us into this mess, and ignorance will get us out, right?
Well, yeah, but if it's clearly going to get worse, which it probably is, then you have to start thinking about how to manage your finances, which is really the point of all this. I think, what can we do about it? It's not really useful just to lament the stupid things that are going on in the world. We have to think, well, how does that translate into protecting my family? And that's the big deal. That we should all be organizing our finances and our broader lives in ways that protect us from stuff like this. I just came back from Peak Prosperity's conference down in California last week.
Yeah, sure.
And that was all about resilience. How do you develop a life that can handle crazy stuff that the world throws at it? And it was useful and interesting. And there were a lot of people there who were actively trying to do that. So it was really helpful to me to see what everybody else is trying to do. And they had a lot of good ideas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it is stuff that you really need to think about too, right? Really is.
Well, it's stuff you should be doing in any event, but it's much more important to do it in times when you're heading into some kind of a disruption, as we are now. We should always be trying to set our finances up so they're protected from the normal vicissitudes of financial markets. In other words, so we've got capital that isn't affected by stock prices or bond prices or anything. And we should always be trying to connect ourselves to our neighbors and to our town that we live in. In a way so that we help people and they help us. And so when anything happens, we've got a network of people that we can count on to help us get out of what happened. And that's basic common sense. You want to do that, but in really good times, you don't necessarily feel like you have to do that. But you really should always set yourself up with a network of people that you help and that are willing to help you and develop the skills that make you indispensable at work. And, it goes on and on. But these are the things we should have always been working on. Now it just becomes more urgent because the world is getting crazier and crazier.
Yeah. The world is getting crazier and crazier. There's no two ways about that, is there?
No. And it comes back to finance. You can derive all the rest of this stuff from a certain set of numbers, which are the amount of debt that we're taking on and the uses that we're putting the proceeds from that debt. If we were borrowing modestly in order to finance productive assets, that would be one thing. But if we're borrowing aggressively in order to speculate in financial assets and take great vacations and buy gigantic houses, that's a different thing. And that's what we're doing now. We're doing the latter. We're using money unwisely on a vast scale. And historically, that always blows up. So we are headed that way, Kerry. Just don't know when.
Yeah. Yep. And that's the problem. The timing is always the problem because until it happens, you're always skeptical. Well, I think we'll leave it at that for now, John. Just make sure you take a look at John's site, which, of course, is dollarcollapse.com. Check out our site, financialsurvivalnetwork.com. Subscribe to both lists. We've got great content that comes out regularly. We've got one coming out shortly. And John, we will catch up with you next Monday.
Thanks, Gary. See ya.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.